Hi, everybody. This is Mark Mitford with HR Catalyst. Today, I'm really excited. I'm genuinely excited about the conversation we're going to have today with a good friend and business colleague that I've known for a number of years, Mike Rose. So, Mike, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Mark. I've been wanting to do this with you for a long time.
Great. I'm excited about it. With that, and of course, I know a lot about your background, but of course, our audience does not. So, I'd love to find out a little bit about I'd like to find out, I guess, two questions here. One of them is, what is your business background in in the entrepreneurial world? And then I want to find out the next question after that would be, what are you doing currently from a business perspective, and how did you get started with that business?
Sure. So I grew up in an entrepreneur family. Ever since I can remember from 6 years old on. Though I probably couldn't spell entrepreneur back then, I definitely knew the essence of what it was and the effort it took to run not just a successful business, and success is defined in different ways by different people, but also what not to do in a business. So my earliest memories are running around my parents' little Italian deli in Western Pennsylvania and doing all kinds of jobs. My first job was restocking the candy shelf. So you can imagine at 7 or 8 years old, restocking the candy shelf. As my dad would say, I ate all the profits. So I had to be promoted to other jobs within the little Italian business. So it was a fascinating way to grow up. I would not change a thing. I learned so much, what not just to do, but perhaps what not to do, to the point where when I eventually graduated high school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but what I knew I did not ever want to do is run my own business. That's because I saw how hard they worked for such little return in their business. So I ran 180 degrees a different direction and was pre-med all through college, took the MCAS, was going to go to medical school. And at the last minute, decided to go work at research and development at Elcon Laboratories as a research scientist with my biochem background. And then about a few years into that, decided to go to law school. Did that for 1 year. That really wasn't, I think, a long-term plan for me. So after the first year of law school and working full time, I got bit by the E gene kicked in, as I call it. The entrepreneur gene kicked in, and I started a business in summer of '97. Long story short, I resigned from Elcon. I dropped out of law school, and I went all in on that business on February 15th in 1998. And a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but I was absolutely having the time of my life. And really found my calling, and end up selling that business in 2016, and to the point where we started a second business and then end up exiting that in 22.
Okay, that is awesome. See, and it's interesting because, and I don't know if you know that or not, Mike, but I was pre-med. I was at pre-med for 3 years.
Nice.
I didn't get all the way to my MCATs, but I've actually got an undergrad in psychology major, but a biology minor. So
Nice.
it's kind of interesting. So it's kind of fascinating, and there's a lot of things I still work today that is kind of nice that I have I can understand biological terms, and I can pretty good at math and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. So we definitely have that in common, which I don't think we actually knew
Yeah.
about prior to this conversation, which is what I love to do when I talk to people, because I always learn something new. It doesn't matter if like yourself, I've known you for years, but it's always great to have these conversations. So tell me a little bit about the driving force. I know you've got a new business venture that you started a few years ago. So tell me about your new business, and share a little bit with the audience about what that's all about.
Yeah. So I feel like I have the shortest resume of anybody. So I've only had one real job in my life, and that was the short stint I had at Elcon Laboratories for about 4 years. But after that, when I started the business, I was just so dedicated to growing our clients' business. So I was in the marketing space. My agency was called Mojo Media Labs, which we sold in May of 23, May of 22 to a global agency called Gravity Global. But through 97 on through 22, there was just an extreme dedication to growing clients' businesses.
Mhm.
And what I discovered when I published my book, Return on Energy, ROE Powers ROI, back in 2012, is I really also enjoyed growing the people, growing the businesses.
Mm.
So that was always going to be my what's next. And I came home one night after a long day of events and whatnot, and I told Nicole in 2013 that we're going to sell Mojo Media Labs in 10 years on May 13th for this much money. And we had run the business together. And as I mentioned, I came from an entrepreneur family, but Nicole came from a family of a pilot and a school teacher. So the absolute opposite of the entrepreneur risk-taking thought process. But she's more adventurous than me and more risk-taking than me. So it was a nice match. But I did tell her that, I wanted to sell the business in one way, shape, or form to the employees or to me exit and business continues on, whatever form that took. But on May 13th, 2023, in 10 years. And the reason for that was a couple-fold. One was I wanted to reapply myself to growing people, growing the business, not just growing the business. And I'm passionate about culture and leadership and entrepreneurship and even the climbers in the career in the enterprise space to continue to grow their careers, how that happens. So that's really the essence of my book. And we end up selling on May 13th, 2022. So actually exactly 9 years to the date. And 1 year early. So it really gave me the opportunity to kind of sit back for a year and really formulate how I wanted to go to market with Return on Energy. And really happy to say that we launched returnonenergy.com and really started putting a lot of effort into helping people grow their businesses, help people grow their careers through getting better clarity, alignment, and better communications internally. So then the people in the business can grow faster.
That's great. That is so awesome to hear, and it's just so fascinating. What are the probability that you had the date nailed, but you accelerated the actual transaction by a year? So congratulations to both you and Nicole. And for those of you that don't know Nicole Rose, she is Nicole Rose's Mike's better half. So and I know both Mike and Nicole, and they're both pleasures to know as friends and colleagues. So so tell me about ROE. And I know we spoke a little bit ago regarding kind of an HR model I think you have regarding ROE. So, did you want to talk about, because I know we talked about the acronym HR, and it seemed like you might have you have a model behind HR to the fifth power for those people who are science kind of nerds, so HR and R five times. So tell me a little bit about, what is the basic premise behind that model?
Sure. So in my agency that Nicole and I ran together, we quickly discovered that everything in, whether it was our business or any business that's out there, or maybe even businesses that might be listening right now, everything in your business is replicatable, whether you have it protected or not. What is not replicatable, however, is the people, is your culture. So I had a mentor tell me probably 15 years ago that a service-based business is only as good as the people providing the service. And that really hit home for us to really focus on the culture of our business. And you have a culture whether you want it or not. You just have to decide if you want it to be good or not. And we not just wanted to have a good culture, we wanted to have a great culture. And of all the awards we've won in digital marketing and various other ones, honestly, the Inc. 5000 year over year over year, but the one that I'm most proud of is Best Workplaces in America. That's something that we strove for many years. You don't really appreciate a bad culture, or excuse me, you don't really appreciate a good culture until you've had a bad culture.
So true.
And employees appreciate a good culture because a lot of them have come from bad backgrounds, right? From environments that just didn't treat or appreciate them very well. So to us, building a company that was profitable was incredibly important, but building a company that was profitable with high employee engagement with a great culture was utmost importance, and we would sacrifice profit for people. So our motto was people over profit. So that's really the essence of my book, is putting people over profit. But I think that as entrepreneurs, sometimes we put people so first that we sacrifice profit, and I don't feel like that should be a compromise. I feel like people and profit should be on a seesaw that's level, and in doing so, with this focus, we created all kinds of tools internally. So return on energy is an internal communications framework in business. So in marketing, we focus so much on external communications, sales, marketing, public relations, etc. But what I found was over 20 years is that the companies that excelled really well were not the ones that had the best external communications. They're the ones who had the clarity, alignment, and good internal communications. So that's essentially what my book is about, is how to improve internal communications. So with that, behind the framework of return on energy, we were able to build a toolbox of about 20 different tools that we could pull off the shelf when we needed to create leverage and take our culture to the next level. And one of those tools is exactly that, which you just mentioned, and that is basically called the people equation. And the people equation is HR to the fifth level, right? We always were trying to take our culture up a notch, and clearly HR stands for human resources, but in the marketing space, we have to make everything cool and hip and brand it. So to ultimately answer your question, H to the HR to the fifth level is simply H, human: recruiting, ramping, rewarding, retaining, and removing. So it's in those 5 different areas is defines what would be your employee journey or your people equation. So in our company, and I think in most companies, we had the word that gets thrown around a lot is onboarding, for example. So we abolished the word onboarding in our company, because when you say onboarding, for example, it creates instant confusion or needs clarification on, are we talking about an employee onboarding, or are we talking about a client or a customer onboarding? So we ramped employees, we activated clients.
Mm.
So we had to just create that internal communication of clarity, alignment, and communication. So for example, ramping an employee meant that there's a lot of metrics that you can measure for ramp. As an example, time to productivity, ramp rate, feedback satisfaction, completion time, time to completion. There's just metrics and best practices that you can put under what would be traditional onboarding, but we just simply called it ramp. That way, internally, when we're creating campaigns, we're creating recruiting campaigns or ramp campaigns or rewarding campaigns or retain and removal campaigns. And that's created the internal communication, and ultimately that journey that we took employees on to ultimately get the best culture we could.
Hmm. That's fascinating. It's interesting because when we talk at HR Catalyst about culture, it's so fascinating because of your view on culture, and it so aligns with what we try to position and really try to get our clients and prospective clients to think about. Is that I always go back to the basics of the only strategic differentiator you have in a business is your culture.
100%.
Everything else can be replicated. Sure, because and I was very familiar with Mojo Media Labs and what a great company that was. And you can have 500 other types of companies that are similar, but the secret sauce, the X factor you brought to the table was the culture, and how you and Nicole were just so intentional about culture, which was just awesome to see because unfortunately, a lot of companies don't. They think it's soft and fluffy. And they really say this has nothing to do with the business, and I'm only focused on the bottom line. So it's shame on them because of all the things, all of the R's you mentioned earlier. It's really, it's a sad state of affair when you have business owners who really are, they think culture is way down on the priority list versus for a well-run company like you've had for years.
I
It's
agree
really,
with what you, I 100% agree. And I think it's sad when there's business owners or leaders focus on just the results. But honestly, I think it's just as sad as there's a lot of very, very good intentioned, benevolent business owners that put their people over their profit, right?
Ah,
And I think that's equally as alarming that we want, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as somebody who lives in a state of fear of losing people, sometimes they give too much and they sacrifice the reason why they're in business to begin with is to create profit for themselves and for the community. And there's a lot of really, really great things you can do with profit. We call profit purpose in our business. So there's a lot of things we can do with that purpose. But when you sacrifice the purpose for the people, then it's as equally as bad, I feel, as focusing only on the profit for the sake of people, if that makes sense. So I
right.
really feel like there's a seesaw, a balanced seesaw approach that needs to happen. And that comes with setting very, very clear expectations internally, and accountabilities to make sure that we're in business to have a great culture, but we'll never have a great culture if we're not profitable.
Right. Yeah, that is so true. No, thanks for that. That's it. Anyway, bottom line is a company has to be generating profit. And because if you don't, obviously that's an entity that's probably it's in an alarming state, and it could definitely, it could ramp up to where it's actually going to be a dying company or a
100%.
company that just doesn't make it. So when you think about, so the five R's, as you mentioned earlier, how well because that kind of that middle market, lower middle market space, companies that are a couple million dollars, maybe $5 million or so in revenue, how well do middle market companies do from your experience regarding the five R's and really making sure that they execute all the five R's and do that well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So whether you're a lower mid market, or even quite frankly a startup, you're going to go through a very predictable pattern to grow the business. You're going to go through what traditionally is called startup to growth to scale. And I'm a big believer in making sure that there's a glossary of terms, if you will, for internally in the business. So everybody understands when somebody uses a term that there's a clear definition to those terms. So um, for example, the difference between growth and scale. Growth is when you're growing revenue, but you're also growing expenses at or close to the same rate as revenue. Whereas scale is when you can grow revenue and not grow expenses at the same rate. So there's a line that the space between expense growth and revenue growth is much greater, and that space between those lines is profit. And I think some of these best practices should be put in place in the startup phase.
Mm,
But in the startup phase, too many business owners are working in their business. They're working in the tactics and not necessarily working on their vision and their strategy. So another clarification of term, working on your business is working on your vision and your strategy. Working in your business is actually doing the work. So when when you can spend time working on it, creating programs, and you get through the startup, you get through the growth, and you have these programs in place, like the people equation is just one of the 19, of the 20 tools. Then when you get to scale, you can scale faster,
mm.
with a better culture, with a more profitable return. So I think it's important to put these programs in place early, and make mistakes when you can in the growth phase. That's perfectly fine. But I think all companies should have the clarity of when they do communicate internally what that means. So I do a lot of leadership coaching. So when I'm coaching leaders, they, in the same conversation or the same maybe even strategic plan they're trying to put together, they combine, hiring people to retaining people to rewarding people, and it's all kind of put together in one conversation or one plan. When I see three different things happening, so when you can create clarity between in the clarity, alignment, communication, when you can first create clarity and say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but these are three very separate, different plans. And as soon as you separate those out for people to create more clarity, then they can create the plan aligned to that, right? And then ultimately can take action on that plan. But when you try to put too many different competing good ideas together, ultimately nothing gets executed. So it's just a matter of creating clarity through this glossary of terms and looking at it as a people journey, as a people equation, and then measuring what's working and not working.
Right. That is so true. So, which out of the five R's, which have you found that there's one that's really a lot harder to implement within an organization? Is there one you're like, oh, this is the one that's going to trip up most organizations, or it's just tougher to implement and make stick?
100% number one, and that's recruiting.
Mhm.
I think, you know, ramping is important. So I'll come back to recruiting because I said that's number one. But the second one is ramp. And ramp, the reason why we say ramp is the analogy we always used internally was imagine it's the first day of your driver's license. You just got your driver's license. You're in the car by yourself for the first time and you're pulling onto the freeway. You're on the access road, you feel comfortable on the access road, but now you're going to pull on the freeway by yourself for the first time. This is what we would explain to employees on the very first day.
Right,
You're
right.
pulling onto the freeway and there's 3 lanes. The last lane is the fast lane. The middle lane is what it is. And then the first lane is supposed to be the slow lane, the right-hand lane. We want you to ramp onto the highway and slowly graduate to move over from one lane to the next to the fast lane at your pace, right? We're going to say that pace is 90 days. So we're going to ramp you slowly. We're not going to just throw you into traffic on day one. So we wanted to create this emotional kind of story to get them to relax and say, we're going to let you ramp at your pace. And we've put together a program for you for 90 days to ramp, right? So that's not onboarding, that's ramping. Onboarding is when you jump on a ship and you take off, right?
Right,
It's
sure,
one
sure.
step. You're one step on, you're ready to go. And then on the rewarding side, the next step is, rewards come in two flavors, incentives come in two flavors, rewards and consequences, and people react differently to both. So I can't incentivize somebody if they don't have a motivation. So the best way to figure out what somebody's motivation is to ask them,
Yeah,
what
sure.
motivates you? It's not always money. It could be flexible work. It could be
Yeah.
4-hour work week. Who knows, or 4-day work week. It could be so many different things. And so our incentives need to be aligned to the motives, and that's where the rewarding comes from. And then, of course, retaining, the way to retain and reward people, and then lastly, remove. Each one of those ramp, reward, retain, remove is much easier if you get the first step right, and that is you recruit properly. And in my experience, the best way to recruit is just to create culture content, what we used to call it in digital marketing. Create culture content and broadcast to the world how awesome your company is to work for. And the voice shouldn't technically be marketing to communicate your culture. It should be the people in your company
Sure,
communicating your
sure.
culture. And in my experience, then that attracts the right talent to your company. And then having a rigorous recruiting process aligned to your culture beyond talent, but are you the right person? And that I think is really, really important to make sure that everything you're measuring beyond that ramp, reward, retain, remove, your metrics will determine if you're getting the recruiting step right.
That is awesome. So gosh, we could, we're gonna take a short break right now, for our audience, but yeah, fascinating conversation. I knew that I could sit here and we could talk until the sun sets this afternoon or this evening. So, but with that, we'll take a short break for the audience, and we'll be right back with Mike Rose and continue the conversation there. Thanks so much.
You want to grow your business, but people issues are getting in the way. Managing the people side of your business is complex and can feel overwhelming. Does this sound familiar? At HR Catalyst, people strategy is our business. We create and implement a people strategy with you so you can get back to growing your business. HR Catalyst was founded in 2013 with the goal of bringing the best-in-class HR practices to small and middle market companies. We are your outsourced strategic people experts. We help you solve the people issues in your business that are slowing you down. If you have HR concerns, you can schedule a complimentary call on our website at hrcatalyst.consulting.com.
Thanks everybody for taking that short break, and enjoyed the conversation very much. The first half of the conversation with Mike Rose, and looking forward to continuing this conversation with Mike. The first half was really insightful, and looking forward to the second half of the conversation. So with that, Mike, out of the 5 R's you've referenced earlier and we're talking about today, what have you found, or which one do you think is there could be a chance that one of them would actually fail, derail, or fail? Out of what you've seen, which out of the 5 R's is probably going to be may have the higher percentage of really failure or derailment at some point within the life cycle of a company?
All of them.
There you go. Next question.
All of them. What gets measured, gets improved, right? So I think it's really important to make this it can evolve into a rigorous process. And I think that's the ultimate goal, to find that people formula that we know we can repeat. So when we get to that scale phase and we have to hire faster, we can do that with less fail, right? But the growth phase, startup and growth phase of a business, is where you can make all those mistakes, and provided they're calculated risks, but you can make all those mistakes. So I think it's really important to work with your team collectively, the entire team of the business, and really get their way in, right? Step one is to get way in on the people process, right? What was your recruiting process like? What was your experience like in searching for a job? When you were a candidate with us, what was your candidate experience, right? If you said no to a candidate, ask them, what was your experience like with our brand, right? I think you can get very inquisitive through the entire 5-step process by asking questions, right?
Sure.
Getting the way in. And I think when people feel like their voices are heard, they're going to move to the most critical, one of the more critical steps is they're going to buy in. They're going to buy into your culture. They're going to buy into the process. They're going to feel ownership, and then they're going to commit to it to help you create the best people journey, the best people equation, and what you measure in each one of those 5 steps is possible. So you can kind of go in with assumptions. You can measure those assumptions, but by including everybody in that, creating that people equation that works for you and your culture, which may be completely different for somebody else, I think is really, really important. So I think kind of where if it's going to break, I think it's going to break in the middle, as most things do. And really that middle part is the rewarding. You have recruit and ramp on one side, you have retain and remove on the other, but things break in the middle. And that's why I think that rewarding step, that reward recognition, is really important. And I think we've lost the ability to properly recognize people. And I see it all the time from an internal business communications is, hey, Mark, thank you for XYZ. I think there's an art to say thank you. And the way to say thank you or to recognize somebody is to thank them for the contribution to the purpose, the mission, and the values of your business. So thank you, Mark, for being reliable. Reliability is one of our core values. You are so amazing at setting expectations, but if you can't meet those expectations, what I really admire is that you follow through and reset expectations in a timely manner so everybody else's train can stay on time. To me, that's a great thank you. That's a good recognition, instead of saying, hey, thanks. If I'm so tying recognition back to the vision of the business, and again, I believe vision is the purpose, the mission, and the values, leadership loses that. They lose the proper way to say thank you. And sometimes if I'm a words of affirmation and I'm being recognized and acknowledged for my contribution through words tying back to the vision, purpose, mission, and values of the business, that might be more important than a 2% raise or a 5% raise or an adjustment on an incentive package. So if things are going to break, they're going to break in the middle. And if I look at the people equation and everything we're measuring in each one of the stages of the journey, I think it starts to fall down or break in the areas of the proper ways to reward and recognize people.
Sure. And it's great you mentioned earlier because it's around rewards and there's lots of different ways to reward people. Because I think being in the HR world for a long time now, 3+ decades, it's interesting because I think the old standard is rewarding somebody equals money. It equals a monetary type of reward, and that's what drives people. And I look at and I talk about sometimes about you look at we still have 5 generations in the workforce, and now we're slowly that baby boomer group as it continues to shrink. We're getting more and more. We're getting a much higher predominance in the workforce of Gen Zs and millennials. Millennials are quickly becoming the larger group in the workforce, and what rewards a Gen Z and a millennial is very different because they typically want to be tied to an organization that has a strong purpose, and they want to be able to understand that the work does not equal I receive a paycheck every 2 weeks or every whatever the cadence is. It's really about I'm doing something that's making a change, a fundamental change within an environment that's good for the organization, that's good for other people, that's good for the community. So going back to your point, it was really fascinating because asking people what would they find, asking people to define what their own construct and framework is around rewards. And for some people, it's around flexibility. It's around different motivators versus, especially with the advent now in 2024, of how many people work hybrid or remote. A lot of times it's a
100%.
big driving force now that people, that's the number one priority over a 2% or 4% increase. If they have the flexibility of work schedule, that would be awesome.
Exactly. And the way we've always looked at that is looking at people's compensation package, right? So at the tip of the spear is their comp package. And unfortunately, I feel like depending on which generation you talk to, you're going to get a different response on the definition of a comp package. Now, I can tell somebody what a comp package is, but our style has always been to get way in first. And most people think leadership is what leaders say or do. But the truth is, leadership is about what leaders don't say or do in many cases. And in starting with weigh in to ask people, what does a comp package mean to you? And that's generally when you're going to discover their motivations. But the truth is, comp packages are divided up into monetary and non-monetary uh, compensation, right? And the monetary compensation is very black and white. There's you can put a bonus program in place. You can put incentives for monetary rewards and of course somebody's salary. But that's kind of a almost set it and forget it scenario.
Mm,
When we start within the four corners of your job description and you start executing on your particular role, then what are the non-monetary rewards I can provide people to align to their motivations to incentivize them to accomplish what we need as a department, as a division, as a company. And that's when you can get really creative on the non-monetary side. And that's where you can create a list in your company. You can create, 4-day work week. You can create work from home. You can create, and you see all kinds of stories and CEOs proclaiming what they're going to be doing on this whole return to work and everything else. But every business is different and every person in that business is different. And we can't make a custom incentive to everybody, but we can at least ask them what they want and collectively come to that conclusion together so we can ultimately have the best culture possible with what resources we have.
right. Yeah, that is great. So, a couple of final things I wanted to ask you if there, for business owners and leaders that are out there listening to this podcast and that they don't have the emphasis on either any of the 5 R's or maybe one or two of the 5 R's, what is your compelling rationalization for them to actually start doing that now and really focus on looking at the 5 R's and really being much more intentional about them? Or if they're missing one or two, then what kind of message would you give to those business owners who are on the fence after listening to this?
Yeah, that's a good question too. A good place to start. So as a leader, I think your number one role is to create clarity for the organization. And creating clarity sometimes as simple as defining what how your business does business, right? So it's the internal process. So when you can create clarity, you can get to an alignment of people, process, tools, technology, etc. And leaders really struggle with creating that clarity, right? So in our business, to get that alignment, we had to communicate very, very clearly with everybody in the company. And so clarity, alignment, and communication, I think, is just the mantra that we follow to have a result of, or the output to, people results in business results. So too many leaders, I think, focus on the business results first, then they drive the people results, but they're not creating clarity and alignment. So I think specifically in the areas of, H to the fifth power,
Right,
HR
right.
to the fifth power is really first getting clarity as to what is your people equation, what is the journey that you're going to take to measure a good people, to have a good people equation outcome, and then what are all the little steps along the way based on looking at it through the lens of what I call return on energy, and how the vision, the strategy, and the tactics are aligned clearly within your business. And from a leadership perspective, it starts with the vision, which again is purpose, mission, and values. So long as I'm building my tools, my programs, my processes through the vision, through the lens of return on energy, then it becomes a little bit more clear. But very, very tactically, to answer your question, by simply taking a piece of paper and writing out recruit, ramp, reward, retain, remove, and then doing that, figuring out best practices on how to measure each one of those phases, can be something as simple as, chat GPT, what are the top 10 ways to recruit in my business, and how would I measure that, and what's a predictable positive outcome? There's just so many different tools available to us. There's so many resources like yourself that people can call up and ask a specific question. I'm trying to solve this problem. How do I retain top performers in my business? Not how do I get better people, but no, how do I retain best performers? And then how do I reward and recognize them in my business? That's a specific problem you're trying to solve. So when you reach out to a resource such as yourself, you can solve that specific problem. But if you have to take 45 minutes to define the problem and 15 minutes to solve it, I'd much rather come to you with a problem that I'm trying to solve that's very clear and specific. So we can spend 59 minutes trying to solve a problem, not trying to figure out what that problem is to begin with.
Right. Yeah, that is so great. Now, it's a we're gonna start again. I in all sincerity, we could have this conversation for another 5 hours, but I know everybody's time is precious, especially yours. So, and I want to make sure that we wanted to probably segue to wrap things up here in a couple minutes. But any final thoughts, Mike, before we kind of move on to a couple of speed questions for you regarding yourself and how how you think, and any kind of last comments, last thoughts you wanted to leave the audience with today?
Not top of mind, just that, the last thought perhaps could be really, it's a struggle. It's a consistent and constant struggle to weigh in balance both people and profit. And if I could urge anybody to when they're looking at their financial statements, or they're looking at the bottom line of the net profit of a business, just to change that profit to purpose. What's the net purpose of my business? And I feel like that helps me reconcile people and profit on a equal field. And I feel like if it's turning one way or the other, if it's getting imbalanced, then we need to adjust appropriately. So when your business or your division or your team that you're managing or leading really starts to take off, that what levers and what things to pull, or what things to outputs to keep an eye on, that you stay on that balanced approach, which why I'm a huge fan of the balanced scorecard in general, but take that balanced approach to people and profit.
Right. Oh, that is great. That is great. So a couple of things just to wrap up and have a little bit of fun, Mike. So, and probably some great recommendations people would appreciate after hearing this conversation and just some of the things you've been so successful with. But three books. So if you were going to recommend, or I'm going to ask you right now. So three
Oh, wow.
books that you would highly recommend. I'm not sure if you're a book reader, but what three books would that really have made an impact for you that you would highly recommend to the audience?
And so many. And I wasn't prepared for this question, so let me see if I can pull this off. So the
You can take a layup if you like, and you
no,
can
no, no.
reference
Well,
your own question,
I'll share what I'm
your
reading
own
now.
book.
Maybe that'll help. So what I'm reading now is one of my new favorite authors. His name is Ryan Holiday. And the specific book that I'm reading right now is called Discipline is Destiny. Ryan is a Stoic, so if you're familiar with that whole concept, it's a fascinating area that I'm really kind of opening my mind to, and I think there's so many great leadership lessons in that book. Um, I'd be remiss to not mention my book. ROE is Return on Energy, or ROE powers ROI.
Yeah.
And the other one I'm reading right now, which I'm really fascinated with, is the great pandemic, or the great in that reading about the struggles back in 1918 and what our population went through is a very we can learn so much from the past, right? And coming out of COVID, coming out of the pandemic that we recently had to experience, and having to adjust everything in our businesses, and I think businesses are still trying to adjust from that. Leadership styles are still trying to adjust from that. There's so much we can learn, and the first part of that book blew my mind. And so, The Great Influenza, I think is the name of it specifically, is a fascinating. It's a heavy read. It's a scientific read, but it's a really fascinating read on how businesses, politicians, leaders really navigated in and through and out of that. And I think there's a lot of things people can take away from that as well.
That's great. That is great. Thank you for that. And definitely I wanted, and ROE, just a personal a plug here is that ROE is a great book. So please,
Thank you.
very, very openly again and honestly, just it's a great book just to dive into. Pretty good, very not a hard read to do, but very powerful in just some of the content and just some of the thought, leadership you have in there. So how about two
Plus,
podcasts?
there's a lot of pictures and it's in color, so it makes
Yeah.
it
Yeah, there you go. How about two podcasts? I'm not sure if you're a big podcast listener, but what about two podcasts that you enjoy actually listening to?
I'm all things about Tony Robbins, so I think he's got a great podcast. I think the one I'm listening to more frequently, though, is called Mic Drop. So MIC Drop. It's put on by a good friend of mine, Josh Linkner. If you are a speaker, this is a great podcast for speakers. But even if you're not a speaker, but you're a leader, you do speak, and there are techniques in different stagecraft kind of ideas that you can get, and how to clearly articulate and deliver and communicate a message that you can pull from the speaker world. So Mic Drop is another one that I listen to, and Josh is a super smart guy, good friend, and he's built a great community in that space.
Right. That's awesome. So last question for you. So want to clock backwards a few years. So if you what would you change? What would you tell your 16-year-old self to maybe focus on or do maybe differently than you've done than you've done after your 16th birthday?
Well, I should have really listened. I should have really read your questions ahead of time. This is good. That's
So
a great.
what sage advice would you give your 16-year-old self?
Yeah, I honestly I think about this a lot, just because now we are empty nesters and all the kids are in school or out of school, and I think about that time of my life pretty frequently over the past few years. And the advice that I would give myself at that age would be learn how to learn. Learn to love to learn specifically. And I took a lot of that information, a lot of that opportunities that I had for granted when I could. And today, and probably over the past few decades, I've really learned to love to learn.
Hmm.
And I think perhaps people, and I instill that in our kids today, right? And not just learn the subject matter that you're walking into school and listening to a professor or instructor on, but expand that beyond just the core subjects, right? And I to really push that home with our youngest, my son who just started freshman year in college this past year. I got him a mentor over the summer, and I really admire this gentleman a lot. And I went to him and I asked, "Would you mind mentoring my son?" And because he has this love of learning, and I wanted to instill that in him, but not directly through me.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand.
So I was able to pass that along. But I think it's to learn to love to learn, and I think that would be something I wish I could do over and do more frequently, and have a longer experience ramp to where I am today, having started that sooner.
Right. Oh, that is great. So how do people, so if people wanted to learn more about some of the things you focus on and learn more, or just reach out to you directly, how do people find you online?
Yeah, our Michael Rose on LinkedIn is the best way to do it. Please follow me. I publish content frequently, and that's the best way to connect with me is R Michael or Mike Rose via LinkedIn. And please connect or follow, and send me a DM, and I'm happy to respond with any questions that might have come up from this episode.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much again, Mike. We're gonna wrap up here, and again, all seriousness, we could have kept on rocking and rolling for another several hours, I'm sure. But thank you again for your time and just the insights you shared. And I know that there's a lot of golden nuggets you shared with the audience today, so I truly appreciate your time. Thanks, Mike.
You're a pro, Mark. Thank you.